Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this Thursday?
Good morning. Doing well.
Right.
And I thought we were contributing to stopping a war the other day. I mean, it was a fizzle. It didn't happen, and everybody was ready. Then there was a lot of disappointment, but they didn't. There's a few people in this world that wouldn't want a chance for a little fight here and there, because that's a little bit exciting. It's good for some markets, not good for liberty, and not good for the average person that has to fight these wars. But, we reported yesterday that, they planned a war and geared it up. Everybody knew about it, and gold went up, markets went down, and everybody was all set for the invasion of Ukraine by that guy Biden and Putin, getting together and having their little fight. But it didn't happen, and then the markets settled down, the people settled down, and even yesterday we were talking about who benefited and who lost. Well, it's a little more confusing today because it looks like everybody's going to lose eventually. Matter of fact, most wars everybody lose in this whole thing except the people who started it and made a lot of money. So, but they're back at it again, yelling and screaming at each other, and our government is saying, They didn't back off. They didn't leave. They still want to come and invade. And the first thing is why is our government so intensely worried and believe they have total control of Ukraine? That's what it implies. It's they're invading our country, and it's based on that assumption, and people go along with it. But Biden, was very very strong on what he said, and in a quick press conference. He was asked a question that he said he knew it because his senses told him so.
Yeah.
So I guess if you have good sense, that's okay. But that was it. There was no documentation. I don't think they ever had documentation other than the fact that Russia was shifting their troops around in Russia, and of course this was portrayed as being prepared to go in and invade Ukraine. And I guess in theory it could have been possible, and in theory it may still happen someday because of maybe some more false flags and accusations and whatever. But right now it's back to where we were the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
And the truth is I personally don't know whether many troops were really pulled back. And my suspicion is that the preparation wasn't really for a war, and moving troops along. As a strategist, I think Putin can send out signals that sort of confuses the West, and especially when they don't have a good reason for looking for a battle with Russia.
Yeah, it's interesting, the on again, off again, and we can actually put up that first clip because this came from Axios. Thanks to Zero Hedge for putting it up first. This first clip is Biden saying that, this is today, he said that his, quote, his sense is that Russia will invade Ukraine within the next several days. Remember, yesterday was supposed to be the day, and that didn't happen. Then it was supposed to be, earlier it was supposed to be the 11th and the 10th and the 20th and this and that. It hasn't happened yet. Look at the next one. The troops were pulling out yesterday in several places, and the U.S. says that's not true. That's false. They're not pulling out. But the thing that's interesting about this, though, Dr. Paul, is that not only is Russia saying that it's not about to attack, but Ukrainian senior officials are vehemently denying that attack is coming. They realize that they're in the center of this, and the U.S. is not going to come to their aid. And again, we talked about this. David Arakania, who is the parliamentary faction leader of Zelensky's own party, so it's very, very close to the president. And I have it here on my phone. I'm going to read it. Here's what he said. I think in 2 or 3 weeks, when this phase vanishes, we should do a retrospective analysis of how extremely well-known media outlets began spreading information worse than, and he names 2 Russian newscasters, said blatant fakes in CNN, Bloomberg, and a Wall Street Journal. We should study this because these are elements of a hybrid war. Essentially, he's talking about the U.S. government, and this is true, I think, conducting a hybrid war using the main news outlets as their conduits, because we know these are just stenographers. They're just reprinting what senior officials have told them without doing any analysis whatsoever.
You know, and you mentioned, I think accurately, that the people of Ukraine don't believe that they will get what they were promised. I mean, we make a lot of promises and we commit a lot of aggression and coups and all this, but you mentioned that the people themselves say, well, they're not anxious to go to war with Russia because they're not going to really have the defense that is necessary. They know the numbers too, and the numbers have been not in favor of the NATO forces, even though they have a lot of countries, a lot of weapons. But the one thing that has continued, and it seems like there's a group of people in Washington that seems that a little bit of this warmongering is good. We might not want this war, but we'll send them weapons. I think there'll be problems. So the weapons still are flowing in there, and the different countries, NATO countries, are contributing to it. But it's a game they play. A few will make profits, but obviously they didn't want this thing to dry up and blow away that soon. And in a way, they've sort of doubled down and you know, making it dramatic how terribly dangerous this is.
Well, speaking of doubling down, you know, Secretary of State Blinken, he went to the UN Security Council and he just gave a talk. In fact, I just watched it and took some notes on it. But he was not scheduled to speak, but he had to go down there because the crisis was so serious. And I want to, if you will allow me, just a couple of highlights from what he said. First of all, he began by talking about the Minsk agreements, and those were made in 14 and 15, back when it was still hot. Essentially, that was a ceasefire in exchange for progress toward autonomy for the regions in eastern Ukraine. And now he said the Russians are ignoring the Minsk agreements, and the fact of the matter is the government in Kiev has done nothing to move toward autonomy for this region. So that's a blatant lie. Here's the other thing, though. The laugh factor is so high for people who pay attention to U.S. foreign policy. Now, he's talking about Russia here. He's not. He says, one country cannot dictate another country's choices of policies or with whom it will associate. This is the principle of national sovereignty. And this is from Syria to Libya to endless regime changes to 2014 itself when the U.S. participated in the coup. He says you can't violate the principle of national sovereignty when our own Assistant Secretary of State is on record, is on tape, saying we're going to change the government.
But isn't that process characteristic of a lot of politicians, most politicians, especially in our political system right now? You know, when the political parties disagree, which is not always, it's always lying about what's coming and trying to stir up trouble. And it's interesting that, you know, on this issue, and we talked about it yesterday, is how Republicans and Democrats have come together. So everybody might not have the same assessment, and they will still condemn each other, but they want to continue doing this, and they will do it. And Republicans come together.
Yeah.
They took a break, and they came up, and there were, especially in the Senate side, they had a lot of Republicans sign on to that. So, and pretending that it's unanimous in Washington, nobody ever cares. But what about doing a poll that is legitimate, just for fun, you know, to find out how many American people you know, care about this, and you better carry a map with you to give them an idea, you know, where it is.
Well, it's also hard because the mainstream media outlets giving us so much misinformation about it because they're acting as stenographers. But here's a little bit more on Blinken, because he claims Russia is preparing to launch an attack on Ukraine in the coming days. We don't know precisely how things will play out. And then he proceeded to say, here are 5 points that we do know, though. Russia plans to manufacture a pretext for the attack. Maybe it'll be a staged drone strike on civilians. Maybe it'll be a chemical weapons attack. And this reminds us of a few days ago when the State Department spokesman claimed that Russia was about to make a videotape of an attack to try to use that. So that's number one. Then number two, Russia will then theatrically convene a high-level meeting to address the crisis that it created as a false flag. 3, the attack will begin. Russian missiles and bombs will drop their loads across Ukraine. Cyber attacks. 4th, Russian tanks and troops will advance on Kiev. Number 5, Russia will target specific groups of Ukrainians, those evil ethnic cleansers. And he says, we realize, and this is the part that's funny, and there's this 2 points finally. He said, we realize some won't believe the U.S. because of previous warnings that did not play out.
Like yesterday.
You think so? Duh.
Like yesterday.
But I wrote down, here's the kicker, though. This is, in a nutshell, this is actually the U.S. policy. And listen to this closely. And this is a quote. The others are paraphrasing. This is a quote. If Russia does not invade Ukraine, then we will be pleased that Russia changed course and proved our predictions wrong. So they're saying, basically, if Russia does what it said all along, which is we're not going to attack, we have no intention of attacking, if they actually do what they said and don't attack, that means that they changed their course and listened to Blinken and Biden and obeyed us and did what we told them to do.
Well, Russia expelled U.S. Deputy Ambassador.
Yeah.
And that'll probably be used by the West to saying, you see, it's Russia. Russia's always up in the odds. But I would think that in a scheme of things, that probably isn't the biggest issue of the day. And I think it was interesting that, Russia thought they would make a recommendation, and which, from our viewpoint, as outsiders looking in, except when it's American people and American money,
yeah.
And he's demanding that the U.S. leave Eastern Europe. Wow, I wonder if they'll respond to that. That'll just be another thing to put more blame on them. But it is really sad. And in Ukraine, and we've said it before, that this mess really started with our gross intervention in 2014. And now there's really, I guess, at least 3 factions in Ukraine. Two groups want to break out in eastern Ukraine, and then there's the government that we put in place.
Yeah.
And but who knows that? Does anybody? We have a couple that would say it in Congress. But, the running the bill up there, they would never hint that, it's our, and, even politically they don't use it.
Yeah.
If it's political, it can be mentioned. Now, we mention it, but not for political purposes, because we don't think one party is far superior on the other party on foreign policy, because they're all interventionists and they're all pro-war, and they're all they all want to live up to the desires of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, and we know there are a couple of good members on the Hill, so these people are excluded from this next statement. But I would love to see just one Republican have the guts to go up there in the House or the Senate and point to Biden's party and saying, all this is happening because of you guys. You're the ones that started this in 2014. You created this whole mess. And
that would have been fun.
That would have been fun. Maybe it'll happen. I have a couple quick clips to go through on this, though, because I want to talk a little bit about the media. If we can move to that clip that has the picture of the Ukrainian president, another all-time media faceplant, and I'll do a little bid for people to subscribe to Matt Taibbi's Substack, TK News. Very, very good. He has a great article about how completely wrong the U.S. media has been and how comically wrong the U.S. media has covered this whole thing. And here's a couple of tweets that he had in his article. This next one, this is the guy from PBS NewsHour, right, being a stenographer, Nick Schifrin. Let's see if we can watch this next one up, please. U.S. officials anticipate a horrific, bloody campaign that begins with 2 days or aerial bombings and electronic warfare, followed by an invasion with the possible goal of regime change. Such detail. And remember, we talked about Melinda Herring the other day. If we can put up this next clip. She's the one that had this, first Russia's going to do this, then they're going to do this, it's going to happen over the weekend, comically wrong. And now here's what she said. She says, emotions were running high and I let them get the better of me. To which one commentator points out, this is the deputy head of the Atlantic Council, NATO's de facto think tank. And she says predictions about a Russian invasion were based on her emotions. She felt that Russia would invade, so journalists globally reprinted her. I mean, that is malpractice.
Yeah. but there is maybe a creeping a little bit of something that could be beneficial, and that is more people, at least maybe I'm dreaming, are getting more annoyed with our hypocrisy in our foreign policy. You know, how we run it around, and you know, we have all the money and all the weapons and all the coups under our belt, and they right now, I think our policies are losing credibility, but it's a shame that this stuff has to persist. But it's so characteristic of what has happened throughout history. And somebody here, I read something today that was a policy that under Nixon, and implying that, just think, wasn't that the stupidest thing that Nixon did? Went to China, and I thought, I remember, you know, the Korean War quite well, and knowing friends and relatives that had to go over there, and some didn't come back, and I thought, well, you know, yeah, sure, we're not going to convert them, but we might learn to live with people if we're doing business with them, and we should be promoting honest business arrangements. But no, it's always a political game and an edge and power, and it would be so easy, you know, to condemn the mistakes of other people. But it happens that if you're going to try to be objective and point out the truth of this, you have to point out the shortcomings of our foreign policy. And of course, that's why we exist, because after a few years in Washington, we came to that conclusion, or emphasize that policy of non-intervention. It's a position that the founders essentially endorsed. They weren't perfect in enforcing it themselves, but it's a principle that you know, is worthwhile. And if people finally want to live in peace, they have to start talking about it. And you already pointed out about the Minsk agreement. You know, they're supposed to be talking about you know, giving some
autonomy.
In autonomy in the East.
Yeah.
But no, that doesn't happen, and they're back now saying, "Oh, how horrible this is," you know. So I get tired of the lies they tell.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be awfully tired because of
Yeah.
them. Well, let's move on a little bit. This is a little bit of a good news story, I think, if you're ready to move on to San Francisco. Not literally, I don't think we want to do, but if we can put up that next clip. This is, there we go. This is something you brought up this morning, Dr. Paul. Of all places, San Francisco voters oust 3 school board members over strict pandemic rules. San Francisco, and I'll just read one line from the AP report on it. San Francisco residents recalled 3 members of the city's school board Tuesday for what critics called misplaced priorities and putting progressive politics over the needs of children during the pandemic.
This is hilarious. You know, they get elected. One ringleader here that got kicked out was appointed. I guess there was an open seat, and it was appointed by the mayor, and he was kicked out. And but they were busy. They didn't just sit there and have coffee. What they did was they wanted to clean up the image of San Francisco. So the names of the schools bothered them. And so they went systematically. That's what they did. They had nothing to do with anything important. So they started changing these names, and they were specifically targeting the best schools, the ones that were doing well, and they had the highest qualification. But of course, that would annoy somebody who's looking for, you know, just problems in the inner cities and cause chaos. I mean, those schools, they must have had a few good things. They were doing a little bit better than the other. Well, we have to change their name, and we have to make them look badly. But this is you know, a good story, because what was this? 72% of the people voted to throw them out.
Yeah.
And of course, polling is okay. But sometimes you don't get a right to poll and vote on this, and sometimes you have to take a stand or take a truck and stand up for something, and you know, and numbers mean something. So we don't have any idea how many people, what percentage of the people in Canada are tired of the lockdown.
Yeah.
But there has to be a growing number of people getting tired of their prime minister. When you think that they'd be getting tired of all this because he's ready to start and reimpose even stricter conditions. And we've mentioned that yesterday or the day before. He wants much tougher. He wants martial law is essentially what he's doing.
I've been watching some of the debates in the Parliament in Canada, and there are some stiff opposition. Remember, Trudeau he's heading a minority government, so he doesn't have a majority of the seats. This is a remarkable thing. We'll go back to this in a second. There's a remarkable thing. A Jewish member of Parliament stood up from the Conservative Party and told Trudeau that this is wrong. We need to stop these mandates, stop these things. And he said to her, his retort to her is, "You're standing with Nazis." And there was a huge outbreak. I mean, almost a fist fight broke out because that is not cool, in any stretch of the way. But anyway, back to San Francisco. It is pretty amazing, like you point out. They kept the kids home. They want to keep them home forever because the teachers, of course, want to sit around in their pajamas. I'm sure the kids that are now going to Mao Zedong High School or Pol Pot Junior High or maybe Che Guevara Elementary School, maybe they'll have their schools now changed back. But anyway, in San Francisco, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere.
These are the words that were used to make those schools look badly. They were removing the school's name because they were high-achieving schools and they were too successful and they needed fixing.
Oh my gosh.
You think, well, all I can say is, well, the people did react.
Yeah.
They threw these people out,
Yeah.
that's good.
Keep it going, keep it going. Well, our last story of the day is also probably a good news story. There's that final clip just to kind of give an intro into what we're talking about. And this is from Roll Call newspaper. Masking battles show how the issue that buoyed Biden in 2020 won't help the party in midterms. Uh-oh, Dr. Paul. The masks are no longer winners.
Yeah, but nobody knows what the final conclusion will be. But I have a suspicion that, it is an issue, and they claim that Biden was helped on the issue because Republicans were said to be not caring about the kids, and the kids were going to die unless we give them all these shots. So, but they're arguing now this is reversed, and the Republicans are going to benefit from this. And this is probably hard to determine, but the vote will make a difference. And I have a suspicion that right now the Republicans are going to do quite well. Does that mean that if I were a betting person that I'd be willing to gamble a lot of money and make up the bet and say, no, this is it, Republicans are going to clean it up? I would say no. The Republican Party and the leadership, because they're interventionists in foreign policy, personal liberty, and economic liberty, that they're liable to mess this up completely and turn it over. I mean, the opposition is ruthless, and they're willing to do anything and say anything, but the Republicans aren't capable of really handling this the right way, because in a way they're a variation of the same philosophy. They're all interventionists. They're all believe in big government in all these areas. So who knows, and especially since the media is so powerful. But right now, I would say this is probably accurate, suggesting the Republicans are benefiting by it. But, maybe in 6 months or so, they might get too cocky and think, well, we don't need any old-fashioned politics. I heard somebody talking about this issue, and he said one of the problems with Republicans is because they are doing, and Trump did better, with minorities. Everybody knows this, even though the media won't report it. So they do better with minorities. And somebody that was informed on this issue, he said, how many Republican candidates are willing to go and talk to minorities? And the assumption is, Democrats' assumption is, they belong to us. If you're black, you vote for me.
That's what Biden even said it, right? He even
you're
said
black,
it.
We own you.
Yeah.
So that's. But now the people there are saying that the Republicans aren't really outreaching in a proper manner.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me once, how do you do this? Your district keeps changing. You had a farming district, and now you have an industrial district, and you move around. And this was asked to me by the media. It said, how do you adjust your message to talk to farmers and vote for the farm subsidies. then you come in and you're along the coast and you have industry and oil and you have to vote for their special interests. And I found that the most disgusting question I've ever had, because the issue of liberty should apply to everybody. And that is the reason why it should be appealing to independents. It should appeal to the people that are in opposition. And we're always proud, and we worked hard on talking to progressives who call themselves Democrats, and they were always, more than just Dennis Kucinich.
Yeah, of
and
course.
now there's Tulsi Gabbard, and she's in that category too. She's getting really strong in defending coalitions and coming together and talking with Republicans.
Yeah. Well, I think you nailed it a couple of months ago when you pointed out that really the election in Virginia was a sea change. That was the event, and I think we're seeing these are the ripples from that, stone in the water. And at the end of that article on Roll Call, there's an interesting point. And if I were Dems, I'd be worried. A recent poll from the Pew Research Center found that the positive ratings of how public health officials were responding to the pandemic had dropped 10 percentage points since August, with the American public almost evenly divided between approving or disapproving of the response.
Maybe the Republicans don't have enough time to mess it up.
Yeah, there you go.
Quick, have the election.
They're going to try.
Don't quiz us on it. And, to me, and one of the issues that certainly you have worked on the most, and that is the foreign policy and the wars that go on. And that it's unfortunate that it's so bipartisan, but there's a lot of money involved and a lot of activity in every state, and a lot of people work for the industry, and they have a powerful lobbying organization, and it is so sad. It'll end. Somebody asked me once about, well, when do you think this is going to end, and when will this all this welfare end? And I don't say, well, just get another dozen or two people in Congress and we'll change the vote. No, that's not going to end. It's going to end with the bankruptcy. That's how great nations end. They end because they reach too far, and they get themselves way extended. And it gets too big, you can't manage it. And sometimes, like the Roman Empire, you have to split it in two, and all of a sudden, some of the nature's helping to take care of it, because it's a natural thing that the people who like power and money will go too far, and the people will finally wake up. And we're trying to speed that up. People are waking up, and we're going to continue in our effort to wake up as many people and talk about non-intervention.
Yes, exactly. Well, I just want to close. I'm going to say this is my last day of the week, but don't forget to tune in tomorrow where Dr. Paul and Chris Rossini are going to talk about all the important economic stuff. I don't know how you fit all the stuff in one show because there's so much going on, but I do want to thank everyone for watching. And please, once again, help us spread the message. This is kind of our way to fight back. The more people we can get to watch the show, the more people we can get to spread the message around, the more we'll grow, and the more the influence of the peace and freedom philosophy will grow. So please do whatever you can. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, like, comment, pass it around to your friends and enemies, ask them to watch the show. And again, thank you so much for watching, Dr. Paul.
Thank you. The interesting part of our job and thinking about issues like this and being separate from the mundane mess that you have in Washington and the partisanship, that to me is so boring. Somebody said, why did you do this and why did you become a congressman? And the truth is that wasn't the goal. The goal was to talk about these things because I think they're exciting. It's just too bad that they are so exciting because sometimes they're so dangerous. War is exciting to the people who's a military strategist, but that's very, very dangerous. And I think that it can be fun, and people. I liked what was happening in Canada because I think when it's a serious matter, and the truckers did take on a serious project, and that people should get along, and they don't know the success. You don't know if they can wave a wand and all of a sudden things are going to be better. And my suggestion is, in the process, that since we don't know what tomorrow will bring, we should have a good time about it and enjoy it with allies, people who are like-minded, and that is good. But we would also like to expand that group of people who are like-minded, and that's why we put this effort into the Liberty Report, to get more people to understand why liberty is the answer to so many of our problems. So we will continue with our program of peace and prosperity, and we'll do it on a daily basis, and we welcome you back to the Liberty Report.